Okay, Angie, anytime.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Angelica Daniel, and I represent Baltimore County Department of Public Works and Transportation, sitting in for Dan today as your Vice Chair. Welcome to the February Technical Committee meeting. This meeting is being recorded. Please turn on your cameras during roll call for attendance and for the voting items. If anyone should experience difficulties during the meeting, please send a message to the chat box. At this time, I ask Rebecca Dybel to start the roll call to determine member participation. Rebecca?
Good morning. City of Annapolis.
Present.
Thank you. Anne Arundel County. Baltimore City. Baltimore County.
Present.
Carroll County. Harford County.
Morning, Harford County's here.
Good morning. Thank you. Howard County.
Here.
Thank you. And Queen Anne's County.
Here.
MDOT. MDE.
Here.
Thank you.
Rebecca, just for the record, all members are here and present. They just joined during the roll call.
Okay. So I will mark everyone as in attendance then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our first item is approval of the minutes from the Technical Committee meeting on December 3rd. Have members had a chance to review the minutes? Can I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Anne Arundel County will make a motion.
And the Howard County seconds.
Anne Arundel County and Howard County. Thank you. We will now vote on approval of the minutes. When your name is read, please indicate aye or nay. Rebecca, please read down the list of members. Rebecca?
I'm sorry. I forgot to unmute. I apologize. Annapolis.
Aye.
Anne Arundel County.
Aye.
Baltimore City.
Aye.
Baltimore County.
Aye.
Carroll County.
Aye.
Whoa. I'm like, if I'm going down the way I want to.
Harford County.
Aye.
Howard County.
Aye.
Queen Anne's County. And MDOT. Thank you so much.
The minutes are approved. At this time, we will hear about a new UPWP task on transportation needs assessment in the region. The presentation will be led by Mr. Walker Freer and Mr. Noah Levine of ICF. Walker?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Walker Freer, the ICF project manager for the Transportation Needs Assessment Project. I'm joined by my colleague, Noah Levine. And we will go ahead and share the presentation here momentarily. Zach or Regina, if you're able to bring that up.
I am trying to locate it now. I had it a second ago.
Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful. So as BMC and the BRTB prepare to update its long-range transportation plan, it's really critical to assess how the region's transportation system is performing and also understanding how it can be better improved to serve the people traveling within the region. So the transportation needs assessment that ICF is conducting will identify where in the Baltimore region transportation infrastructure is inadequate, where public transit service may be deficient, and how both exacerbate travel challenges and travel times in the region, with a strong focus on people living in the region's equity emphasis areas. Next slide, please. All right. So today we will provide an overview of this needs assessment, briefly kind of run through the project schedule, give an overview of the approach, and we'll also share kind of findings from our initial literature review, which has been a comprehensive review of existing surveys and research that have been conducted at the regional, local, and state level. So based on that review, Noah will provide kind of a categorization of the needs that we've identified thus far related to Resilience 2050 goal areas. And I do want to note that this task is kind of an initial analysis of existing research, and this will be refined through some of the subsequent tasks that we are conducting as part of this assessment, which I'll provide a little more detail on momentarily. So lastly, we'll lay out the next steps for this project as we just recently got started, and open for any comments or questions from this group. Next slide. And I'll actually skipped that bit. Perfect. Thank you. So as I noted, this project just kicked off recently. We began in December, and it'll be a pretty quick sprint. We're going to be wrapped up by July 2025. So we're currently in the first phase. As I noted, this entails reviewing previously conducted surveys and research, moving quickly into the second phase, which will analyze the region's existing transportation network, the conditions, pull in a lot of data from around the region that exists, try to add some analysis of our own. And this phase will end with a interactive GIS story map. So the story map is intended to be geared for the audience is the general public of the Baltimore region, but to highlight the transportation challenges and opportunities to the public, as well as BMC partners, provide useful resources for the members of BMC and other transportation stakeholders. The third phase, which will be more focused on this spring, will include a public survey and also a facilitation of focus groups, which will end with a video that kind of summarizes how these transportation challenges affect people at a more personal and daily level, as opposed to a data-heavy focus. And that's kind of a theme throughout this project, is the focus on the user, and ensuring that we're kind of understanding beyond the data, how these transportation issues and challenges impact people within the region, and how improvements can better serve their daily transportation needs. So, and then in June, we'll wrap up with some final recommendations and present findings to I imagine several different BMC committees. So we will likely be back in front of you all later this spring or this summer. Next slide, please. So as I've noted, the presentation today summarizes a review of previously conducted surveys and research. So again, this consists of resources that were conducted by regional bodies, so BMC specifically, state organizations, MDOT and others, and then local entities. So we reviewed, to the degree that resources are available and exist, reports and surveys conducted by BMC jurisdictions to develop a draft list of these transportation needs and priorities for each Resilience 2050 goal area. So there's an overwhelming amount of data that we were able to source and document. But as I've noted, the focus really will be on the perspective of the transportation system user. So for this first pass, we paid particular attention to studies that included surveys, focus groups, or otherwise had a specific community engagement component that would be helpful to inform this effort. So for our purposes, needs consist of issues, challenges, and gaps in performance of the transportation system in relation to the 7 goals of Resilience 2050. And the purpose of this exercise was really to inform the survey that will come this spring, and kind of identify key areas for us to focus on in the story map creation, which we've already kind of started developing based on the early returns. Next slide, please. So I'll just briefly run through this slide, as everyone on this call is familiar with the Resilience 2050 goal areas already. But the 7 goal areas for the transportation system that are shown here on the slide are really what we used to kind of categorize and classify the preliminary findings, and is how we are structuring the story map. And we'll certainly look to find specific pain points and feedback through the survey process that are related to these individual goal areas. And then 2 others, which are not shown here, which are also kind of guiding how we approach this, but are not as much user focused, are the 2 that are focused on transportation decision-making process. So fostering participation and cooperation among all stakeholders and promoting informed decision-making. So those 2 kind of underpin all the analysis that we're conducting and the recommendation that we ultimately make. And now I will pass the presentation over to Noah, who led this comprehensive document review, and he will walk through in more detail some of the preliminary needs and challenges that we've identified through this literature review.
Thanks, Walker. So as Walker mentioned, we've reviewed more than 30 documents published by state, regional, local, academic, and other sources in the BMC region. Again, with respect to the needs and priorities of transportation system users in the aforementioned goal areas. On this slide, we focused on those in bold, which are the ones that entailed more robust community engagement. And those studies with asterisks were scientific surveys, so even more robust in terms of the methodology there. At the state level, these included the 2020 statewide household travel survey, the 2020 to 2023 state disability survey, the 2020 statewide transit plan, and the 2023 commuter survey. At the regional level, we looked at a lot of BMC products, certainly, including the ongoing Bikeable Baltimore Region project. We also looked at the ongoing or 2024 post-pandemic trends in employment, commercial real estate, housing location choice, and travel demand, which I think you'll hear about as well later this morning. In addition to the 2024 public attitudes on housing and transportation. I'll also note that I think you'll hear about the long-range transportation scenario planning project as well this morning. But we've tried to incorporate sort of high-level findings from those ongoing efforts in this project as well. And finally, from local and other sources, we reviewed the 2023 Hopkins Baltimore Area Survey, the 2019 report on the status of people with disabilities in Howard County, the 2016 George Mason Public Perceptions of Climate Change, and various community health needs assessments from BMC member jurisdictions. So again, pretty extensive look at what's been done thus far. Next slide, please. In addition, so to augment our literature review and inform our survey administration and focus group facilitation, we also conducted 2 interviews with staff from MDOT and BMC. Very briefly, some key takeaways from our conversation with MDOT included a need to engage more subway and light rail riders. They're currently engaging bus riders through their Be More bus study, in addition to public school students who constitute a large block of transit riders, but often don't have as much of a voice in the transportation planning process. And on the BMC side, we spoke with both Charles and Charlene, who noted the ongoing Bikeable Baltimore Region effort and flagged previous surveys for us to review, which was very helpful. They also noted a lack of understanding of the connection between traffic calming measures and safety, which is something that we can certainly explore as we move ahead in this process. Next slide. So now we'll get into some of the draft findings from this review. So as Walker kind of mentioned, we tried to use this structure of the LRTP goal areas from Resilience 2050, but did want to note some high-level takeaways that kind of transcend that goal area categorization. So first, per BMC's post-pandemic trends report, users' top transportation goal was reducing congestion. Other top goals included increasing safety for active transportation, a safe and secure transportation system, addressing climate change, and improving public transit. Meanwhile, fewer than half of respondents to BMC's regional public opinion survey said they were satisfied with the quality of roads and bridges, public transportation, or traffic in the region. Third, according to the Hopkins Baltimore Area Survey, which was conducted or has been conducted at least in across 2 years or 2 or 3 years here, the percentage of Baltimore City and County residents experiencing transportation issues decreased actually from 2023 to 2024, which is a good thing, but it was generally higher in the red line corridor than outside of it, which was sort of an interesting finding there. In the context of the Priority Climate Action Plan, respondents indicated safer streets, which would include slower traffic and better lighting, as actually the top change to their neighborhood that would improve their physical or mental health, which was again sort of an interesting finding. However, I should note that in general, there was a lack of information on system users' needs or priorities, specifically around mobility, automotive safety, system security, and transit infrastructure condition. So those were gaps that we noted as we were trying to kind of work our way through the goal areas here. Next slide. So now I'll work one by one through the LRTP goal areas and note both the needs and priorities under each. So for accessibility, and just for reference, so per the LRTP, accessibility means identifying and supporting multimodal options and systems that promote equity, are resilient and sustainable, and enable all individuals to reach their destinations safely and seamlessly. So in this category, we found a handful of needs. The first of which is that roughly half of respondents to the Exploring Public Attitudes survey said that public transit was a major or moderate issue, and a plurality of respondents to the PCAP, which is the Priority Climate Action Plan, rated the quality of public transportation in their area as poor or very poor. According to the report on the status of people with disabilities in Howard County, the top unmet transportation needs for that population concerned fixed route buses, paratransit services, and cost. Separately, several community health needs assessments identified a lack of transportation as a significant barrier to healthcare services. Moreover, the Hopkins Baltimore Area Survey found that residents of color were twice as likely as white residents to report transportation issues, and also that the percentage of those reporting transportation issues increased markedly down the income ladder, with only 25% of those making roughly $70,000 to $110,000 per year, but nearly 70% of those making under $30,000 per year. So a pretty stark increase. And finally, with respect to active transportation, the Bikeable Baltimore Region Survey found that the top barriers to transportation, or to biking rather, are a lack of comfortable bike lanes or paths, feeling unsafe biking in traffic, and not having a safe place to park their bike. So those are the needs. And on the priority side, we found several as well. So respondents to the Regional Transit Needs Assessment indicated that ease of travel and travel time were more important than service quality or price for them. They also called for improving connectivity between MTA and locally operated transit services, more first or last mile options in suburban areas, and better coordination with human service organizations. Relatedly, respondents to the Regional Public Opinion Survey cited convenience, safety, and frequency as factors that would make them more likely to use transit. Based on MDOT's statewide transit survey, top desired destinations for transit included other long-distance modes like airports or longer distance train stations, in addition to recreational and social destinations and employment destinations. For respondents to the Bikeable Baltimore Region Survey, the top 3 factors for a successful bike network included safety and protection, connectivity and continuity, and accessibility. I should note, though, that there were some racial disparities here, with 82% of Black respondents, but only 42% of white respondents, again, to the Public Perceptions of Climate Change survey at the state level, saying that making public transportation more accessible or affordable was a priority, should be a priority for the state. Next slide. So now we'll cover mobility and system safety. Mobility per the LRTP entails helping people and freight move reliably, equitably, efficiently, and seamlessly. Here, needs included the following. So we noted satisfaction with the level of traffic differs across the region, but most respondents to the Regional Public Opinion Survey believe that traffic was worsening, especially in exurban parts of the region. Moreover, nearly half of respondents to the Exploring Public Attitude Survey viewed traffic congestion as a major or moderate issue in their community. In addition, according to the 2024 Baltimore Area Survey, satisfaction with transit was considerably higher in Baltimore City than Baltimore County, where it was rated worse than sanitation, policing, or schools, for a bit of a kind of comparison there. While there is a lot of data, certainly on congestion under this category, kind of quantitative data, we should note that there was generally a lack of information on transportation system users' priorities for mobility. So that is a gap that we're looking to fill through our focus group and survey, certainly. Then turning our attention to system safety. So system safety per the LRTP entails reducing the number of crashes, injuries, and fatalities experienced by all users of the transportation system. Generally, there was a lack of information on transportation system users' needs and priorities for automotive safety in particular, again, outside of all of the kind of crash data that we have available to us. Intuitively, respondents to the Bikeable Baltimore Region survey felt safest on a side path or shared use path or trail, and least safe traveling in a standard bike lane or road without bicycle facilities. Respondents to the BMC Public Transportation Choice Study generally viewed transit modes as safer than driving with respect to accidents, but less safe than driving with respect to crime. And in terms of priorities, top improvements that would make the Priority Climate Action Plan respondents more likely to bike or walk included safer crossings or sidewalks, more protected bike lanes, and better street lighting. Next slide. So now we'll cover environmentally responsible transportation solutions and improving system safety. I should note that in the context of the LRTP, environmental responsibility entails passing on to future generations the healthiest natural and human environment possible. In this category, we noted a couple of needs. One was actually from the BMC EV Community Charging Report, which predicted increasing demand for public EV charging, especially from those living in multifamily buildings. However, only 31% of respondents to the Public Perceptions of Climate Change survey said they were concerned about the impact of climate change on the transportation system in Maryland. Priorities in this category included the following. So the majority of PCAP respondents were somewhat or fully supportive of EV car sharing programs in their communities, while the Regional Public Opinion Survey found more interest in purchasing an EV among younger, college-educated, and higher income, as well as non-white respondents. The majority of respondents to the Public Perceptions of Climate Change survey said that reducing water and air pollution should be a high or very high priority at the state level, which was even higher than among Black respondents. And then under improving system security, again, there was a notable lack of information on system users' needs or priorities here, possibly because security incidents or natural disasters seem unlikely or remote from the daily experience of those using the transportation system. So again, this points to another area for us to explore in our focus group and survey efforts. Next slide. So this is our final slide on the LRTP goals. And here we have improve and maintain existing infrastructure and promote prosperity and economic opportunity. So under the first category here, needs included that according to the Regional Public Opinion Survey, satisfaction with the quality of roads and bridges varied across the region. Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and Anne Arundel County were identified as jurisdictions where the condition of roads and bridges could be improved. And then according to the 2024 Baltimore Area Survey, roughly half of residents said that the key bridge closure had impacted their lives, with 10% saying that it had done so a great deal. Priorities in this category were sort of related in that respondents said that rebuilding the Francis Scott Key Bridge was critical to the region's economy and reducing traffic congestion. However, in general, there is a lack of information on system users' needs or priorities for transit infrastructure, so thinking about the condition of rolling stock, stations, and stops. Under economic prosperity and opportunity, this goal area relates to supporting the vitality of communities and businesses and opportunities for workers and the movement of goods and services with and through the region. With respect to housing, the vast majority of respondents to the Exploring Public Attitude Survey expressed support for transit-oriented development, but respondents to the Regional Public Opinion Survey were also supportive of restrictions on growth and development, So a little bit of a tension there between those two findings. With respect to employment, 1/5 of respondents to the public opinion survey cited the cost of transportation as a barrier to full-time employment. Also, understanding the needs or the impacts of remote work on the region's transportation network is ongoing. Again, I think you'll hear later this morning from the Post-Pandemic Trends Survey Project, but nearly half of those respondents reported working fully in person, but employees aged 35 to 54 expressed the greatest preference for remote work. And finally, according to the 2023 State of the Commute Survey, 35% of Maryland workers currently telecommute, and 37% would like to, of which 14% feel that they cannot in their current job. So a bit of an unmet need there among potential telecommuters. And now I'll pass it back to Walker for some next steps and then to take some questions.
Thank you, Noah. As noted several times already, this review of existing research and surveys will really inform the analysis of the kind of existing conditions that we are conducting now, and will ultimately be compiled in the ArcGIS story map. So pulling data sources from across the region. And I'll note that several folks on this call today at BMC and at MDOT were consulted and interviewed already for supplementing some of the resources and surveys that we reviewed. So we are trying to cast a very wide net in terms of all the participation. And we certainly would like to hear from this group if you feel that there are specific findings, resources, or other materials that would be helpful as we develop the existing conditions analysis and prepare to develop the survey instrument and prepare for focus groups later this spring. So with that, I'll go to the next slide, and I think we would just like to open it up to kind of general questions or comments in the few minutes that we have remaining.
I do have a question. Sam Kale with Harford County. Sorry to introduce myself. A couple slides back, it's mentioned that when it came to climate change and the transportation system, I think you said something along the lines of 31% respondents said that they were only 31% of respondents were concerned about the impacts of climate change on the transportation system. Was that, just to be clear, that was the impact of climate change on the transportation system, or was it also, was the wording of the question also like, are you concerned about the impact of transportation on climate change? Was this one-way street climate change and how it impacts the system, or the impact of the transportation system on the climate? Because at first I wasn't sure. Reading it, I think it's the one way, but I just want to make sure I understand that question a little more.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And yeah, so just to confirm, so this was the statewide public perceptions of climate change survey. So it was reflective of respondents from all across Maryland. But in this case, the question was framed in terms of the impact of climate change on the transportation system.
Okay.
So more of a kind of resiliency frame as opposed to a sustainability frame.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
This is Jeff Anderson at MDOT. I just wanted to flag that I think we've got some work that has some real overlap in scope that we're about to launch, and that we ought to leverage each other's efforts on this. So we'll be following up.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, and we will share our contact information, and of course we're always accessible through Regina or Zach as well. But we would love to connect with anybody on this call or others that may be relevant to help this effort. All right, well, thank you everyone so much. And again, please do reach out directly or via Regina and Zach, and we'll be, I'm sure, making an appearance to this committee later this spring or summer.
Thank you so much, Walker and Noah. At this time, we will hear about an ongoing UPWP task with an overview of scenario planning processes to date. The presentation will be led by Ms. Hannah Twaddell of ICF. Hannah?
Okay, you are muted, Hannah.
There we go. That probably sounds a little better. There we go. All righty. And are my, is that little slide deck visible now?
It is visible,
Yes.
but maybe you could enlarge
do-
it.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll do it in presentation mode. So here we are. That probably looks a little better, I hope.
Yes, all good.
Fantastic. All righty. So thank you all very much for your time. I've got a little, it looks like a lot of information being thrown at you. So I'm happy to take questions and just want to caveat, this is obviously hot off the press, work in progress that we're doing with Zach and Rahman and the team. But it's pretty exciting and a lot of fun. So I'll be talking today just about a little bit of background on this sort of strategic modeling, scenario planning concept and tools that we're using, and then just walk you through the scenarios we've been building and tell you about sort of the next steps in this process that we're kind of in the middle of. So the overarching purpose of this little project, which started last fall and it'll conclude this early summer, is just to build the agency's capacity to explore and take a look at potential new kinds of policy actions, priorities that could help us to address transportation issues that are really pressing, but also kind of uncertain or difficult to predict. The process is to take a look at, create and evaluate some alternative future scenarios using this tool that the staff has downloaded and very, very quickly, by the way, I think fastest in the country, as far as I know now, from all the Vision Eval users around the country, standing up this strategic planning model called Vision Eval that was developed by Federal Highway Administration and a group of transportation agencies around the country over the past 15 or 20 years. It's a publicly available model. In addition, we'll be using BMC's travel model Insight and a little bit of spatial analysis using some GIS tools. So those are kind of the three key tools for developing these scenarios and studying them. We conducted a public survey. We've got some workshops coming up to seek input about them. And finally, we want to discern some of the implications, the risks, the opportunities of these different potential policy actions that could all be ultimately rolled into the 2027 LRTP update. And some of the technical steps to that update, like the criteria for prioritization and scoring of projects. The schedule, as I just sort of mentioned, began last fall with some of the early research. Right now, we're in the sort of finalizing our data and numbers. Things are changing on a daily basis, but they're not changing a lot. We're down to the fine-tuning part of putting together the scenarios. We're about ready to start running them. And then we will be moving into some conversations with stakeholders, refining the scenarios, diving a little deeper with the travel model, and coming back in the early summer with some recommendations for the LRTP update. I want to talk just a little bit about what the strategic model concept is within sort of the array of models like the ones I just mentioned. So a strategic model like this Vision Eval tool, it's not the only one, but it's a good one, really help us to look at big picture questions. Basically, what if we did this versus that? What would the impact potentially be? What are the trade-offs? What are the implications? Basically, really trying to ask some good questions to stress test our ideas in terms of about what kinds of investments we're thinking about making, what kind of policies we're thinking about establishing. Tactical models are typically like travel models, where you're really then saying, okay, we've settled on maybe one or a few, kind of a select number of options. Now we really want to dig into how are we going to do it? What are the trade-offs and implications specifically with regard to, in this case, for example, how traffic moves, multimodal traffic moves around our network, given different policy changes. And then finally, operational models like intersection analysis tools and signal timing models and so forth are for when you're really implementing a project. So that's kind of the flow of how these different models fit together. And typically the strategic models are kind of used as they are here, kind of earlier in the transportation decision-making process. So when we're in these early phases of fine-tuning our vision and goals, looking at potential alternatives, evaluating and prioritizing strategies, all of that feeds into your long-range plan, and then your process of selecting and monitoring performance. For the most part, these strategic tools like Vision Eval have been used in this early part of the process. They're basically 3 building blocks to pretty much any scenario planning tool, pretty much any planning tool, as a matter of fact. But those building blocks, in this case of our strategic model, are the outcomes we're looking for. So what are the metrics we're trying to accomplish? Is it about changing the number of vehicle miles traveled? Is it about improving our travel time, improving congestion? Is it about changing our mode share so that more percentages of people are using bike or walking or transit? Those kinds of outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. And we generate those outcomes by a combination of 2 things. One is the actions we take as public sector agencies, in this case, transportation and partner agencies like community development and land use and economic development agencies. So those, actions, sometimes we call them policy levers, if you will, as if it was literally a lever moving a rock. Might include things like making different packages of transportation investments, or establishing new kinds of fees or incentives to encourage or discourage different kinds of behaviors and so forth. And we combine those actions with the external forces out in the world that have an impact on kind of what happens with those actions. We have our intention of what we want to have happen, but then of course life happens. So we've also are dealing with things like the price of energy or global economic trends, or the adoption of new kinds of vehicle technologies that are coming out onto the private marketplace. Some of those external forces that really could have a significant influence on either our ability to achieve a policy or the way it all turns out. So that's what I'll be talking about in a few minutes in terms of the building blocks that we've been working on putting together. But first, I'll just give you a few lessons learned experiences from some of the case study research we did early in the project with about 10 or so different agencies around the country, of the many actually agencies now that are using this Vision Eval tool. And just as a quick rundown, I'm not going to read all of this, but I highlighted a few sort of lessons learned about sort of the process, the engagement, the types of things people looked at around the country. And, a few of the highlights there, folks commented about how the process itself tended to help policymakers, people like you all, the public, to just gain new insights, kind of realize, maybe tackle some hard questions that have been difficult to get our heads around before, or maybe we didn't even think about before. In some cases, maybe the strategies we were looking at, as in Burlington, Vermont, and I'll come back to that study in a few minutes as a case study example. Some of the strategies we might test in this visioning strategic modeling exercise might be infeasible. In order to be effective, they have to change to a great extreme. But as you'll see in the case of Burlington, including some form of some of those really ambitious strategies can even still jumpstart a whole new conversation and new initiatives that may not have even made it to the table before. So it's a little less in this sort of strategic modeling step about trying to get everything really accurate and perfect. It's much more about introducing new ideas, being a little ambitious, being creative and out of the box, but still using data-driven decision-making for to the greatest extent possible here, so that we're not just guessing. We're really documenting and studying, what we know about the data in the region in order to discuss these issues and experiment with new ideas. So looking at some of the priorities around the kinds of goals and potential scenario drivers and inputs, we did do a very brief little survey, not a big scientific survey, but we wanted to at least put our fingers on the pulse a little bit of the public. So we had a small survey out for about a month under the Baltimore's public input involvement platform, the web-based platform you have, asking about their opinions about drivers of change and the goals that we were trying to organize our outcomes under. We got just under, about 650, almost, a little more than that responses. It was not a representative sample. It tended heavily towards highly educated people, more males than are in the region a little bit, and fewer African-American population than normal in our region. So a little skewed in terms of the response, not surprising, but at least this gives us a little bit of a feedback. Again, some of our stakeholder meetings will help us get some additional feedback and new perspectives. And of course, all of this exercise is intended just to lead us up to the really public long-range plan update that's coming up over the next few years. So we're really in this process of generating some initial ideas. But the kinds of priorities folks had when they were asked to sort of rank different kinds of policy actions in our little survey tended towards interests in things like transit and bike walk systems, greenhouse gas emissions, maybe some new kinds of fees, organizing land use around transit, and having higher density and more mixed use housing. Affordable housing particularly was a key interest there. In terms of those external drivers, those uncertainties or forces out there, really interested in seeing how working from home might make a difference in our transportation and travel demand, how electric vehicles and ride sharing might make a difference for us. What happens if we grow a little more than we might be forecasted to grow in terms of jobs or income or more demographic shifts, and then also wondering and wanting to see, potential impacts, as we were talking about in the last presentation, of extreme weather and other indicators of climate change or resilience issues on the transportation system and on public health. And that leads us to outcome metrics. Priorities included things like access to key destinations, safety issues, particularly around non-motorists, but also motorists, transit ridership and trips taken by bike or walk, as well as travel delay and trip times. Transportation and housing costs was of a fair amount of interest to people and other kinds of costs. And then finally, again, some of these climate outcomes, or related outcomes, as you were saying, the impact of the other way, transportation on climate. One of the classic indicators is greenhouse gas emissions in this case. So that was something that folks were interested in seeing. And coincidentally, that is one of the indicators that this tool was originally designed back in the early 2000s, I think, to study. It grew out of a tool that was specifically focused on GHG emission analysis called GreenStep. So that's the original origins of the Vision Eval tool. So there will be a test on this slide, and I'm only going to show it for 2 seconds. I'm teasing you, but this is a one visual of all of those inputs in one place. But I'll walk through what they look like and explain a little bit more about each one for a few minutes. And again, just the caveat that all of this is being updated in real time as we speak. So don't worry too much about the specific accuracy. The numbers, we're very busy in the background working on that data and fine tuning it to make sure that the scenarios are going to be reasonably accurate when we begin to run them soon. But it's very close. So we've got these scenarios sort of organized into, as I said, these 2 kinds of drivers you're looking at, whether it's actions, policy lever drivers, or external forces. We have about 3 types of each in our scenario model that we're setting up. So the policy lever drivers include different transportation investment packages we could look at, different organization of housing, and different kinds of fees, transportation fees or incentives programs. And then 3 types of external forces. So economic shifts, changes in transportation and working technology, and then resilience and environmental impacts. And I'll talk through each of those. The level 1 package of these elements of inputs represent what's in the current long-range plan. So that one kind of stays consistent throughout all the scenarios. All the other levels of inputs are kind of on top of that, this long-range plan assumption. But some of the highlights of that, most of these are expressed as a delta or an increment of change, dating back to 2010 or maybe 2020 and the year 2050. So some of the keys around that have to do with, according to our current long-range plan, we've got transit revenue miles increasing by about 15%, mostly due to cutting the headways in half on several key routes. Our bike and walk trips are estimated to go up by about 8.5%. About a quarter of our vehicle miles traveled, DVMT, daily vehicle miles traveled on freeways, will be on corridors that have some kind of transportation systems management and operation, or TSMO controls, like signal coordination, incident management, where you're cleaning up after accidents very quickly and efficiently. There are nearly 5% more roadway name miles, so a modest amount of additional construction of roadways. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 280,000 more housing units. That's one of the numbers we're fine-tuning there. Gas tax is expected to go up by about 21%, just kind of trend data there. Again, more trend data in the outside world there. We expect to see roughly 17% more jobs, almost a 50% increase in per capita income, just as time goes on. And this last one is interesting because you just saw in the last survey about 30-some% right now of Marylanders work from home. Before 2020, the typical level was closer to 4.5 to 5%. So we can definitely see the impacts of COVID on this one. So many of us are achieving our work from home goals in our TDM plans without even trying right now. But we're kind of giving us a sense here of the starting point for these various scenarios we're going to try to test by putting together different bundles or packages of these little elements that all contain data in them for different setups, different running of scenarios. So the transportation investment packages or elements are organized into 4 levels above and beyond that level 1 base, right? The long range plan. So I'm not going to read every single thing on this screen, and we will be able to distribute these slides afterward, but you can get a sense here of some of the types of ways we want to try to move the needle or move the dials in our little scenario tool, analysis tool. and test out the potential impacts on the outcomes we want to look at. So the second level of transportation investments focuses a lot on increasing transit revenue miles and bike and walk trips through a couple different strategies. The third level is a more intense version of that transit bike walk investment package. The fourth level focuses more on what can we do with systems management and operation and ride sharing, TDM program type actions. And then finally, the fifth level is an alternative of that fourth one, where instead of looking at adding TDM programs to TSMO operations improvements, we expand the roadway network by another 10% beyond the long-range plan. For housing and demographics, we have an addition here of 90,000 new housing units. This is partly it's in response to some state legislation that's kind of underway and around affordable housing. And so we want to try testing what happens if we are able to build above and beyond what's in our forecast, another 90,000 new housing units. Presumably that would attract some new residents. So we're assuming about 60,000 of those would bring in some new residents, so our population goes up. And basically the four different packages or elements and levels of the housing data have to do with how it's distributed around our transportation network, whether it's rail and bus or job centers or a little bit of both, or in that fifth level, kind of distributed basically the way the forecast currently calls for in our LRTP model across the region. Under that fees and incentives package, we've got variations of different levels of assumptions around how much the gas tax might increase. That's incorporating federal, state, local, the whole package of sources, some of which we have a little bit of control over, others of which we don't. In the second level here, second package, we try increasing, adding a new tax on vehicle miles traveled. This is something that many states are actually trying out now in various forms. So in Virginia, for example, where I live in Charlottesville, people who have electric vehicles right now have the option to, instead of paying the higher registration fee that was imposed a few years ago, as a trade-off for the fact that electric vehicles are using less fuel, owners can opt to pay a per mile tax on the use of their vehicle instead. And they can see, am I going to pay more money with the higher registration fee, or might I save some money because my car is so gosh darn efficient? I'd rather pay a tax per mile. So that's what that kind of VMT tax is supposed to incentivize there. So the second level has a VMT tax of 5 cents a mile, the third level 10 cents a mile with an even higher gas tax. And then the fourth one throws a lot of stuff into the mix. So we're bumping up the gas tax again and the VMT tax to the level 2 numbers, but we're adding some parking fees, and we're even adding a little what they call congestion pricing fee, where in the urban center on very congested time periods, we're adding a tax or a toll to those freeways. So those are the pricing packages we're playing with and setting up right now. And then finally, excuse me, on the external forces, we're looking at playing with a couple of different levels of more jobs and higher income levels. We're looking at some different packages of potential changes in transportation technologies and work from home statistics or deployment, if you will. So level 2 focuses on using electric vehicles and having more EV charging facilities, which again, that particular one has something to do with some recent legislation as well. Level 3 focuses on what if we're using car sharing services, maybe things privately operated like Uber and Lyft, or publicly operated, or both, or microtransit. But in one way or another, people are using less personal operated vehicles, more car sharing services in level 3. In level 4, we're zeroing in on what happens if we vastly increase the work from home percentage. And then level 5, it's kind of a variation of level 3 where we've got car sharing services, but driverless, they're automated operating. So so it adds a great level of efficiency and safety benefits, particularly based on the research we know about the future of automated vehicles at this point. And then finally, under the category of resilience and the environment, we've got two sets of map data that we're looking at that are outside of this vision eval model and the travel model, but we want to be able to do some comparisons with spatial analysis tools and just visual examination of the overlays during our workshops to take a look at the data from our Maryland data sets that show us the predicted inundation of land areas around Baltimore, particularly around the coasts and low-lying areas, and the associated roadway networks and infrastructure and services that may become uninhabitable or somehow compromised due to sea level rise and sort of just constant sort of low-level flooding. And we have data about that we can look at. And then we also have data about the locations and the numbers of people who have some kind of higher vulnerability or risk of having transportation barriers or really extreme needs. So persons with disabilities, older adults, low-income households, and so forth. We have a couple different mapping tools available to us from that, the Vulnerable Populations Index, the equity emphasis areas. So those are two of the sort of external data sources we want to incorporate into the analysis process. So we've gotten through the inputs, and then we just have this one slide on the outputs. It's much simpler. These are the kinds of performance measures you're more used to seeing. Many of these are the kinds of things that you do already look at in your long-range plan process. But we're able to analyze the vast majority of these using that vision eval tool and or the travel model. So taking a look at the different packages scenarios on access to jobs, vehicle miles traveled and delay, safety, crashes, environmental impacts like air quality, GHG emissions, or fuel consumption, and then finally economic prosperity, so costs of transportation and incorporating actually some housing costs as well as transportation costs, which is something unique that your staff has put together. That'll be an interesting experiment for our group of vision eval users around the country that are interested in trying that out. So you're leading the way on that particular one variable at the moment. The testing process kind of looks like this for any given performance outcome you want to look at. You're taking a look at what happens to this performance indicator or that performance indicator. You can look at them one at a time. So if this is greenhouse gas emissions and we're applying the base case, that's the one in the middle. So that's just our long range plan. And we've got the package of transportation investments. That was column A. We've got the demand management or the transportation fees assumptions in level C. And we've got some external forces in there from level D, for example, as a way of clustering together 3 different of those elements and levels. What does that look like in the base scenario when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions? What if we try looking at a scenario like at the top there, where we combine that base plus some elements from the extreme level 5 of those same categories? And that might produce much higher results. What if we look at the one on the bottom there where it says scenario 1, the base plus 3 of those same types of elements from level 2? So you can see this just vision eval produces 1,000 or more, scenarios, results very quickly, not just for one input at a time, but you can put in just all of them and they all interact with one another and affect the outcomes you're looking at and allow you to kind of walk your way through how that happens and how those different variables and elements relate to one another and influence one another. So that's really the kind of big power of that tool. We are working right now, this is the last part of the presentation, on putting together some visualizations of the scenarios we're about to run, because we'll be having some workshops in a month or so at the beginning of March with some of our stakeholder groups. And we want to be able to show them kind of the first outputs that we're getting from our scenarios and get their take on what we're seeing. So I'm just going to show you one of the ways that kind of visualization can appear or look like, and how it can be thought through. This example comes from Chittenden County in Burlington, Vermont. They applied Vision Eval to a corridor study they were actually in the middle of for Interstate I-89. It was a big, primarily highway-focused study. 2/3 of the way through the project, they suddenly started getting a lot of pushback from the public about why aren't we looking at TDM and traffic reduction and bike ped and transit options. And so they actually updated the scope of the study and added Vision Eval as a tool, and added a whole set of scenario options that had to do with non-highway investments or TDM investments. And so you can see here, the little array of inputs they used, their policy levers and the various elements that they used. So, and then their process involves saying, starting at the bottom, we want to achieve a certain kind of output or results like greenhouse gas emissions or increasing transit trips. And we want to combine that thing in the middle, those policy elements, different combinations of those policy elements. So level 1 of the first category, level 3 of the second category, level 2 of the third, and so forth. So those little slider bars move up and down. So if we pick out that scenario at the bottom that's highlighted there that reduces household daily vehicle miles traveled, which, we want to zero in on the ones that do the best there. You start to see how those slider bars arrange themselves in order to accomplish that scenario, the combination of elements. So that particular case, kind of the best outcome after you run it a few thousand times, you start to see that you're accomplishing the best sort of range of outcomes by combining together some higher population growth in more dense communities, which is one of the more intense land use scenario or element, plus access to bike and transit, much, much higher, plus a VMT tax on the pricing scenario, plus some of the, continuing to invest in some of their car sharing and EV policies. What you also see here is that some things that might impact VMT that we thought would, in the case of Chittenden County, didn't really have as big an effect on it as they thought. So that included travel demand management policies and income changes. And so that was sort of interesting. So you see things that, are impactful, and also things that might surprise you, that you thought would have a big impact, and they don't so much, perhaps in combination with some of the other things you're doing. Another set of policies, we're looking here at, okay, we had household VMT. What about if you want to reduce overall VMT? Pretty much all the policies, when everything shook out, were pretty much the same levels, except for the first one, which was the population growth. That particular outcome did not depend on additional population. It was just more about reorganizing the current population in that compact level. So slightly different outcome. Again, taking the third one, looking at, well, how about if we want to reduce VMT, or excuse me, greenhouse gas emissions? Somewhat not surprisingly, it's basically the same as the set of policies to reduce the overall daily vehicle miles traveled. So you start to begin to see, and this is a static way, but how looking at different combinations of different levels of investment in these various policies and levels of impact of these various external forces can come together to influence the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We go through a process of, winnowing it down to saying, well, overall, what's kind of our best combination of policies for a given goal or set of goals we want to accomplish. In Chittenden County's case, it came down to, this little package of different levels of those various input and elements and external forces. In this case, this is specifically the policy elements that they're looking at. And so these were kind of the short list of the recommendations that actually went into that plan that was adopted, I think, in 2023. And the agency is now actually working on, starting to say, okay, how are we going to do some of these ambitious goals? There were some implementation steps in that plan, but as you can see, a lot of them are pretty ambitious. So they're diving into that now. I just talked to them a few days ago, and scratching their heads and working hard on, how are we gonna triple transit service, especially now post-COVID, when transit isn't as feasible as it used to be. So they can go back and use Vision Eval again if they want in these subsequent studies to try different options and replace things and brainstorm new ones. But overall, they have kind of a North Star here of how much they want to reduce their VMT and a good starting off point for the kinds of policies that they can be digging into and work with their partners at local and state levels to accomplish. So this gives you a little, visualization of how that process worked for that particular agency, and maybe a preview of how it might come out for this agency in terms of what to look at in the long range plan. So just wrapping up, our next steps, we're just about to move into running those scenarios with the Vision Eval tool. We're planning some workshops the first week of March with about 3 different groups of small groups of stakeholders, so basically some focus groups, and then spend the remaining months of the spring refining the scenarios, running a select few using the travel model to dig in a little deeper, and then coming back with sort of a short list of potential policy refinements to study further in the long range plan as that gets kicked off, the new update. And I will stop there and ask for questions and comments and feedback to the extent we have time.
Thank you, Hannah. Do members have questions for Hannah? A lot, yeah.
Regina,
Yes.
I did have a question. That's a tremendous amount of information, a lot more detailed, and it's going to take a while for me to process that, but thank you. But looking ahead on this slide, and what I was thinking is, how do we use this information to adjust or refine our policies moving forward, goals, objectives, policies moving forward, which I see as one of the upcoming steps. So what do we need to be thinking about there? I mean, are we looking at tweaking our existing policies so we can measure them with this tool, or are we adjusting policies so that they can be measured by this tool that aren't currently measurable now or predictable? Give me some food for thought for as we're moving through this process and we're moving into that next step, I guess.
It may be a little bit of both. And Zach, I always defer to you as well, since you're very, very elegantly managing this study. And I can't tell you how impressed I am with your staff, by the way. They really are pretty amazing. But policies, that's one of those words that sort of, sometimes it means just an action, like an investment strategy, like increasing, decreasing head days to improve, boost the revenue miles you get, or adding more roadway capacity or so forth. So sometimes policies means an action. Sometimes policies might mean a goal or a target. So kind of any of those types of potential changes to the policies that go into a long range plan, could be food for thought through this scenario study. And so this particular exercise we're doing, which is pretty much all internal. The only public facing part of it has been this little survey and then, you know, these sort of focus group workshops. But the whole idea is to spend some time this spring thinking about what are the kind of potential policy actions, maybe some new measures or indicators, maybe some new types of actions we could consider that would be by the MPO or maybe by partner agencies that we might want to, you know, study and discuss with the public during the long range plan update. I don't know that this would so much impact, you know, the overarching goals that you're setting, the high level policy goals. The strategic modeling is more about playing around with different potential ways of achieving those goals. But you know, the food for thought might even come back with some thoughts about, you know, the overarching goals and vision, and all of it's food for thought that you can you know, advance into that long range plan process. But you'll have some data driven information behind that food for thought, so it's not just sort of throwing an idea on the table as you get started with your long range plan. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, to a question that wasn't asked very well. So thank you.
And Steve, I think, like, specifically, I think this could potentially inform some of the goal, not the goal so much as Hannah said, but strategies that we develop early on in the process for the LRTP. Maybe we identify some scenarios that, you know, kind of robustly across all the different combinations, a certain investment or housing distribution or something that performs very well. And so we could then try to integrate that and look at our existing strategies around, say, access or mobility or whatever, or economic prosperity, and say, okay, well, maybe we want to try to pursue this in this way, because we found that this could be effective. Now, it is a very high level tool. And so it's also just kind of about exploring uncertainty and identifying possibilities that we can then refine and explore in more detail in the future. We are hoping that this informs the LRTP, and we will use it to do so. But I think we are also hoping that we can continue to use this tool. We have it built up in-house. We are getting consultant help with building the tool, but now we have it. We will be able to run new scenarios pretty easily now that the base model is built up, and so it can be available beyond this project as well.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm glitching here. That gets to a question I have. Just curious how you're going to determine which scenarios to run, or where we can get more details about which scenarios you're actually going to test.
We can, excuse me, circulate this particular slide deck, which gives you you know, kind of a high level preview. I'm going to run back to that.
And I can
slide
interject very quickly that both Steve and Jeff have been invited to one of the workshops. So
you'll get to
will
see
be
them. Yeah.
part of this discussion.
Right. But basically the process over the next few weeks is going to be to mix and match pretty much all of these colored boxes on the screen here. And try running them and see how they fall out in terms of those performance outcomes. And many of them are going to not make much difference. And then a few of them are going to be really interesting and maybe have some real impacts. And so those, you know, those few that really kind of begin to bubble up to the top, just like that, you know, Chittenden County one had, you know, there were several packages that didn't really move the needle, but then there were a few that really might have a big impact. Those are the ones that we want to pull together and talk to the stakeholder groups about, particularly getting some insights on what are those sort of trade-offs potentially, for example, between expanding, improving safety versus increasing travel time. You know, that's sort of a classic, you know, tension. That often happens when you're trying to put together different packages of investments and achieve different kinds of goals. So to the extent we can pull out and illuminate those kinds of trade-offs as well as risks, as well as opportunities to advance some of our goals or improve our outcomes in under different levels of uncertainty. And we want to get reactions from those stakeholder groups about, what we chose to try, and suggestions or ideas about, did you think of this variable? Maybe that variable didn't really make sense to me, or maybe it implies something that you hadn't thought about. And then after those workshops, we want to go back and, fine tune, maybe rerun, maybe add or change some of these, numbers or percentages or packages you see on the screen. And then, run them through the travel model for a little more detail about how the various packages sort of play out more specifically across the network. So that, the interaction around how these things are being built and what packages we're sort of choosing to try is in progress internally right now. And then we will sort of talk about them with stakeholders, and then come back to you all with some of the presentations about what we're finding. And all of that rolls on into the long range plan. And as Zach said, this tool continues to be something you can use. So you can keep using it and refining scenarios further all throughout that long range plan update.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Okay, I appreciate the questions. We do have another presentation. So Angie, if we could get back, and Hannah, thank you very much.
Yep.
No problem. At this time, we will hear about another ongoing UPWP task with a presentation from Mr. Kevin Pullis of WBA on phase 1 of the Post-Pandemic Trends Project, including results from the employee and employer surveys. Kevin?
All right, thank you. Just want to make sure, can everybody see the slide deck okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Good place to start. All right, well, first off, thank you everybody for having us. Just a moment. And all right, give you some background. We conducted surveys among both employers and employees in the greater Baltimore area to examine behaviors and expectations regarding their current work situation, commutes, work from home policies, and to observe changing trends related to work from home commercial real estate markets and home location choice decisions. This is the first of a 2-presentation series, with the second part which will occur in March, covering secondary research our team conducted and our final conclusions. These 2 surveys were conducted between late February and early April 2024 among a representative sample of area residents and a convenient sample of businesses. A total of 1,630 residents and 77 businesses were surveyed. The residential survey was conducted online and by phone, while the business survey was conducted entirely online. Furthermore, the employee data was weighted so that it aligned with census data on the area by various socioeconomic variables. Okay. The employee survey took an average of 15 minutes to complete, with questions on multiple topics, centering around 4 key topic areas: their job and company, working from home and commuting, both now and pre-COVID, what employment is like now and what they expect it to be like in the future, and questions to understand respondents' makeup and demographics. Now, the employer questionnaire, which took an average of 8 to 10 minutes to complete, also covered 4 topic areas: their company, their workforce, current issues surrounding transportation and their workforce, including issues with telecommuting now and in the future, and some questions to help us develop a profile of the companies being surveyed. Through the remainder of this presentation, we obviously won't touch on everything that was covered in these surveys. Instead, we'll hit on some major takeaways and then conclude by describing the 7 segments that make up the employee population of the greater Baltimore area. To start, let's talk about what employees are currently doing versus, what employees are currently doing versus their ideal work situation in terms of working in person versus working hybrid versus working from home. In the first half of 2024, almost 2/3 of employees work either entirely or mostly in person, while conversely, 1 in 8 work entirely remotely. Note that it appears that those who say they work mostly in person, in fact, work almost entirely in person. This means, depending on how you define it, between 23 and 41% have some degree of hybrid employment. And overall, 95% of employees were employed by companies that have a physical work location in the area. Now, let's compare that to employees' ideal work environment. Interestingly, it's a very widespread. Two trends we saw in this were that those 44 or younger being more likely to see hybrid versus fully in-person work, and women being more likely than men to want fully remote work. The note with the latter that a large majority of women still wanted a work situation that was at least partially in person. What are Baltimore area employees looking for, and what has the greatest impact on their overall satisfaction? These are shown in these two tables. What they're looking for varies. Though flexible schedules, remote work options, and pay transparency were the most frequently mentioned. There wasn't much variance across industries, though in-person and historically lower paying jobs such as food service and retail often were the least likely to seek these benefits. We also asked employees how satisfied they are overall with their jobs and how satisfied with various aspects of their jobs. From here, we can see that having resources and accommodations in place to promote accessibility, their work schedule, including the number of hours worked and flexibility in scheduling, and the amount of control over how, when, and where they work has the greatest impact on overall job satisfaction. And remember that job satisfaction directly correlates with employee retention. We asked employees whether they agree or disagree with some aspects of their work environment, maybe that they may be limiting to them. Only 1 in 6 said they don't have enough flexibility at work to maintain a proper work-life balance, or that they don't have enough control over when, where, or how they work. In fact, more than half of employees disagreed with this statement. Only 1 in 6 said they have enough flexibility at work to maintain a proper work-life balance, or that they don't have enough control over when, where, and how they work. Nonetheless, about 3 in 10 have considered changing jobs or even gone as far as exploring other possible jobs. Now here we see that employees and employers expect what employees and employers expect to happen with work from home in the future, with the top table being what employees think will happen and the bottom table being what employers think. Interestingly, they're expecting very different things. Most employers don't expect much change, whereas employers are expecting a greater return to in-person work or simply are not sure what is going to happen. An interesting aside, of the 5 employers surveyed who plan to require employees to return in person more frequently, 3 stated that their company is considering or taking steps to encourage employees to return to in-person work, such as designing new office space, mandating days in the office, or hosting more special events. Now, why do people want to work from home anyway? There is some disconnect between why employees want to and why employers think employees want to. Employers do seem to understand that employees want to avoid congestion, which is one of the primary reasons employees want to work from home. However, employees also want to work from home in order to save money on commuting and spend more time with friends and family, including with children and family members in need of special care. Both are reasons that few employers mentioned. Now, while commuting to work is down across all modes of transportation since COVID, it has had a greater proportional impact on public transportation than on driving. Among all employees, including those who telecommute prior to COVID, 69% drove themselves to their workplace at least 3 times a week, whereas now 62% commute by driving. By comparison, 12% would commute this frequently by public transportation, whereas 6% do so now. Now next, I'd like to turn it over to Rockman, who will explain some analysis we did to understand the various segments of the Baltimore area employee population. Rockman?
Thanks, Kevin. This is Rahman. I'm a travel demand modeler at BMC. Now we'll talk about segmentation of employees or respondents. From the survey, we found that respondents have diverse socioeconomic background, travel behaviors, work arrangement, mood choices, attitude, and aspiration about work from home situation. One of the BMC's objective was to understand the current market structure, where the respondents live and work, what portion of the society they represent, how they behave and think, how they perceive and use different modes. To understand different segments of respondent, we applied cluster analysis. Cluster analysis is a tool by which we can identify the pattern by grouping individual into different groups. Grouping is done based on the similarities and dissimilarities of different characteristics of the respondent. Next slide, please. From a pool of 157 variables, we have selected 21 variables to do the clustering. Before doing the cluster analysis, we conducted a factor analysis. We found 6 factors after the factor analysis. The factors and associated variables are presented in the table. Next slide, please. After factor analysis, we determined the number of clusters to divide respondent into different groups. We found 7 is the optimum number of clusters to reduce error in the dataset. Then K-means algorithm was used to group the respondent into 7 different groups, all clustered with associated individual presented in the figure. The figure shows that each individual are well matched with other members in the same cluster. So the cluster is reasonably good. Now, details of the characteristics of the cluster will be presented by Kevin in the following slides. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, Rachman. From the process Rachman just described, we were able to place Baltimore area employees into 7 segments: comfortable remote professionals, frustrated flex seekers, resilient essential workers, grounded workplace leaders, flexible free spirits, hybrid harmony achievers, and restless job seekers. Now let's take a brief look at each of these groups of employees. Our first group are comfortably remote professionals. They make up 16% of the employed adult population. These people are typically employed full-time, working 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. Many are mid-level and front office. Many do mid-level and front office work in white-collar jobs. They're often very satisfied with all aspects of their job, working in positions that offer a lot to them. They are less likely to be looking for a new job, and it's likely because of this. More than half work from home, with a number working entirely from home, and almost all work in a job where work from home is possible. This is a group that is working from home a lot more since COVID. They want remote work, flexible work schedules, and pay transparency. They would also like to either work from home or on hybrid schedules. Very few want to go back entirely to in-person work. They don't feel that remote work is negatively impacting their ability to do their jobs. They don't drive much because they're not commuting. They're also using public transit less frequently than others. They like to avoid congestion and like saving money. They're among the most educated and best paid of any segment, and they're a little older and the whitest segment. The next segment are frustrated flex seekers. This is 3% of the working population. Employed full-time and predominantly working Monday to Friday, frustrated flex seekers are made up of those working middle and upper management white-collar jobs. Somewhat unhappy with their jobs, they work either in person or hybrid, even though almost all have jobs they say that can be worked from home. They receive some perks, and while it's not as many perks as some, it is still more than others. What they feel they lack is much control over their jobs. This is making them consider wanting to leave their jobs. What they are looking for is remote work, flexible work schedules, and pay transparency. Interestingly, despite their dissatisfaction with their level of flexibility they have, a number work jobs that do provide flexibility where they can decide when they work from home versus working on site. However, they may feel compelled to work on site more than they deem necessary. This is the group whose work status has changed the most since the beginning of the pandemic. and the only group that has a notable portion working in person more than in the past. Their ideal work environment is hybrid, meaning they are simply seeking more opportunities to work from home. However, they think if anything, they may have to come into work even more in the future. This group is educated, somewhat higher income, probably in their mid-30s, and most likely to have children living at home. Third group, resilient essential workers, who make up 18% of the population. These workers represent a mix of part and full-time workers who work both during the week and some on weekends, doing customer service or manual labor for a wide mix of employers. These are in-person essential workers who continue to work during COVID, so we all know who they are. Not necessarily satisfied with their jobs that do not offer many perks, particularly a lack of remote work options. Some are considering seeking other employment. They would like some hybrid work opportunities, though they either do not see that changing at their current job, or if it does, changing to even more in-person work. They use a mix of transportation, including public transportation. This is the least educated and lowest income segment, and they are a little more likely than others to live alone. They are also less likely than others to own their own home and their own vehicle, though many still do own cars. This is the youngest group, with more than 4 in 10 being 18 to 34 years old, and they are by far the most likely to be people of color. Fourth segment are grounded workplace leaders, 8% of the working population. Many grounded workplace leaders work in person full-time at a range of industries. They are either in middle or upper management or in customer service, including jobs that may require them to work somewhere other than the same place every day. They are happy with their jobs, and as these jobs offer opportunities for decision-making, internal and external education, and employee recognition. What it does not necessarily offer are flexible schedules or remote work, though many are just fine with that. The majority of grounded workplace leaders saw no change in their work status since before COVID-19 and have continued to work in person full-time. Those who do work from home struggle a bit with being distracted, feeling out of the loop, having trouble leaving the house. With this, some may be considering looking for another job. This is a segment that drives the most. This is the oldest group, with more than half being 55 or older. They also tend to be somewhat higher income, even though they have moderate levels of education. Our next segment are flexible free spirits, 24% of the working population. Many of these folks work part-time, often in person, though occasionally at home, for small companies. They work a lot on weekends in customer service, research, or other jobs in a wide mix of industries. Many are self-employed. They are very satisfied with their jobs, and even though many of those jobs do not offer many perks, they do provide flexibility. Flexible free spirits are largely made up of older, middle-income empty nesters and are not necessarily highly educated. They skew towards white Caucasian, although about 1/3 of them are Black or African American. The next segment, hybrid harmony achievers, 21% of the population. These folks work full-time, normally Monday through Friday, doing office work or healthcare, often in middle or upper management. Virtually all members of this segment work jobs that can be done from home, which they feel comfortable doing, and many work jobs with flexibility where they can decide when to work in person versus remotely. These hybrid jobs are what they want, and they are working from home much more now than they did prior to the pandemic. They do not drive because, like an earlier group, they do not commute a lot. They are often very satisfied and stable in their jobs that offer lots of perks. They generally expect things to stay the same, not expecting any changes in their company's work from home plans. This is a well-educated, higher income group. They also tend to be a bit younger and are likely to be Hispanic or white non-Hispanic. Our final group are restless job seekers. This is 10% of the population. Many restless job seekers work in person full-time with a fair amount of weekend work, doing customer service and manual labor jobs in healthcare, industrial work, and education. They are not at all happy with their jobs, which offer little in the way of flexibility or other perks. So not surprisingly, they are likely looking for other work. What they want are remote work options and flexible schedules, as well as pay transparency. They work mostly in person, though their ideal is a mix of in-person and hybrid, which could be in part because they work jobs they know cannot be done entirely remotely. When they do work remotely, they often take advantage of this to do a number of things, particularly spending time with friends and family. This segment is middle income and not necessarily well educated. This group is younger, 36% being 18 to 34 years old, and they represent a mix of races and ethnicities. Okay, like I said, that is just a high-level overview. There is a lot of data here. It is also the first of 2 presentations, and note that there will be a full report available on this. And with that, let me open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Kevin, for your presentation. For the next discussion, I will turn the meeting over to Todd.
Great. Thank you again, Kevin. Appreciate it. I think, Regina, we're going to turn back to you. So, Kevin, if you could relinquish control, please.
Very well.
Thank you. Okay, Regina, would you like me to share my screen or would you like to pull up your presentation?
I almost have it. Sorry.
Okay, take your time. I can do some introductory remarks. I know we're kind of gone through 3 different presentations that have been funded through our work program, so this is perfect timing. We are here today to talk about the next series of our annual work program. We call this the Transportation Planning Budget. The federally required name is the Unified Planning Work Program, but we find that fairly confusing, so we just call it the Transportation Planning Budget. We do this full program every 2 years. So this is going to be a document that looks at both fiscal years 2026 and 2027, but we're really focusing on fiscal year 2026. And then there will be an amendment next year to handle kind of new projects and the funding for fiscal year 2027. So next slide, please. So coming up in fiscal year 2026, we always do an estimate of our budget. Again, our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So right about mid-year, we are anticipating a carryover amount of about $2.19 million in both federal highway and FTA funding. Again, the funding that comes to the Metropolitan Planning Organization is 80% federal funding. That 80% is broken up into funding from Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. Then we have match funding, graciously coming from the Maryland Department of Transportation, and then local funding coming from dues that go to the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. So this means that in fiscal year 2026, we are estimating about $10.8 million available for our annual work program. Next slide, please. Of that, we need to fund the BMC staff to do all of the requirements of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Therefore, we are asking again for about 2/3 of that funding, or $7.1 million, to go to BMC staff, again, to meet all of the federal requirements that are programmed through the Metropolitan Planning Regulations. That leaves some funding available for consultants, of which we'll talk about some proposed focus areas here in the next couple of slides, but then also local support. We have been trying to fund locally driven projects that have regional focus. And again, we are proposing the same amount of funding as was proposed last year for these types of local support projects. Next year, we will estimate a budget again for fiscal year 2027. Next slide, please. So again, we need to meet core work program requirements of the Metropolitan Planning Regulations. These have really not changed. There is a proposed change in the Metropolitan Planning Regulations that we've been hearing about for a while, and there's new administration, but as of this time, we still have an old regulation that was done a number of years ago that we still need to meet all of the various requirements. So we as staff are kind of breaking apart all of the different work we do to make sure that we cover all of these individual areas. And what that leaves, next slide, please, is some funding for some focus areas. We've been talking about these as a technical committee way back since October. So the past 4 months, We've reached out to all of you. We've reached out to the different subcommittees of the BRTB, to different staff members, to try to identify what are the regional priorities for fiscal year 2026. What projects do we need to do to kind of get up to speed in different types of activities? We have identified about a dozen of these. I'll quickly run through these, but hopefully these are ones that you recognize from basically the presentation from last month. So the first one is setting aside funding to work with the new MDOT prioritization process. Again, the prioritization process does have advantages to projects that have gone through some sort of feasibility studies. So again, we're trying to give our local jurisdictions a leg up by hiring a consultant to do some early work on some of the projects that are in your priority letters and that you might be submitting into the new prioritization process that is currently under consideration at the General Assembly. One of the projects that was brought up at the AMPO conference, there was a lot of interest in some of the data providers and some of the crash data analytics and some of the telematics that they are providing. So before we go out and do a major data purchase, we thought it'd be good to do a study of these different types of providers, try to get input from both local jurisdictions, potentially police departments, other types of departments, to see what would work best within this region. Two different modeling updates. Again, it's been a while since we've done an update on our freight model, but then also we're looking with the state to update the household travel survey. This was last done in 2018 and 2019. Again, as you saw, that was pre-pandemic, so travel has changed fairly dramatically since that time period. It makes sense for us to team with the state to do a statewide household travel survey, to update our models and to update information for all of our major projects. We're proposing to continue our partnership with the Transportation Association of Maryland, developing lots skills and training support. A lot of the programs that are being developed by TAM are being supported by the BRTB, and I do know that they are very appreciative of the different support that's coming from the BRTB. Continuing with the Patapsco Regional Greenway, this is one of the segments up in Carroll County, identified a potential Henryton Road Bridge, and this would be to kind of move forward that individual segment within the project within the Carroll County area. Next slide, please. Moving to the next 6, Regional Transit Partner Survey. Again, this was identified where we've done a lot of work at MTA and the LOTS agencies, but we do have both private and nonprofit providers such as the College Town Shuttle, some other providers where we think we might be able to actually work with them to understand their routes, potentially maybe do better coordination with all them, trying to understand how we can make this a seamless service for all. Next is a state of the region benchmarking. Again, it was suggested that we start looking at our region versus other regions. This is going beyond transportation, looking at demographics and economics and some lifestyle, programs, but again, trying to understand how our region compares to a lot of other regions in these different types of metrics. It was proposed that we continue the Transportation and Land Use Connection Grant Program, trying to keep the money up there. We've had some very successful projects so far, and we hear that there's a lot of interest within our local jurisdictions to try to keep this moving. Setting aside some money to continue the AMPO Transportation Planning Institute, which is the online training program. There are 2 programs right now, one an MPO 101 program and one that's a federal funding introduction, and AMPO has indicated that they're planning on adding at least 4 additional programs this upcoming year. And we at BMC are looking to add some local programs so that you would have on-demand training for new staff or just refresher courses. One of the items that we saw at the AMPO conference was actually from Oahu, which would be great if we could actually all do a little trip out to Oahu to learn about this.
Yeah.
But what they found is that we're hiring a lot of new staff that aren't necessarily well-versed on the federal funding program, what it takes to actually go all the way from the beginning to the end of a major project through the federal aid process. We have a lot of new staff, a lot of new discretionary grants, a lot of programs that we think we could help our local jurisdictional staff kind of gain that knowledge and help us move through some of these grant programs a lot easier. Then building off of the successful Bikeable Baltimore Region project, there is interest in updating some of the local bicycle plans based upon that program. So we're proposing to have some money in there and then take some proposals from local jurisdictions as they come upon the schedules to update their local bicycle plans to try to make sure it's well integrated with the regional plan. So that proposes about $2.5 million worth of consultant activities in our upcoming work program for fiscal year 2026. Next slide, program. So the schedule again, today is the February 4th. We're hoping to get approval from the technical committee today. We don't need a voice vote individually. We can do it just on consensus to release this draft work program for a 30-day public review. That deadline would be March 9th for public comments. And then we would present these comments to the BRTB at the March meeting and ultimately vote to approve this at the April 25th joint elected official meeting here at BMC. And then we would circulate all of our contracts, work with our federal partners for approval, and then get approval by July 1st so that the funding can go out there. So without any further items, what I'll do is I will ask if there are any questions, and then I will also ask the chair to see if we can ask for consensus to release this draft planning budget for a 30-day public comment period. Thank you very much.
All right, now on to other business. The next
Madam Chair, sorry about that.
Oh, sorry.
Could I ask you to call for consensus to release this work program for a 30-day public review? I apologize.
Oh, no problem. Can we have a consensus to release this for, you said another 30 days?
Yes, please. Okay.
So all those in favor of releasing the document, please say aye.
Thank you, Regina.
Aye.
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 Is there anyone concerned with releasing the document? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Now we can
Thank
move on,
you.
Madam Chair.
All right. The next tech committee meeting will be virtual on Tuesday, March 4th. Is there any other business to come before the committee?
Madam Chair, we are asking for a closed session very quickly to go through some potential RFPs. So if we could close the official technical committee meeting and ask anyone who is not a technical committee member or a staff member from BMC to leave the meeting.